All right. It's summer, so we're going to get started. I know people have places to be. So, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Tonight's discussion is Elevating Property Staff Performance. My name is Elise Rosemarin, and I am a Senior Vice President here at AKAM. Joining with me tonight is Vishal Kaura, who is my esteemed colleague here at AKAM, and I like to think of him as a secret weapon. Vishal Kaura is our Vice President of Staff Training and Hospitality here at AKAM. And I welcome you tonight. Thank you so much, Vishal, for joining us. You're going to tell us all your secrets.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for Elise giving me this opportunity, and thank you all for everybody everybody who has tuned into this webinar this evening. I really appreciate you being here. My name is Vishal Kaura. I am the Vice President of Training and Learning Development of Hospitality. Background, a little bit about myself. I have a very extensive hospitality background. I started my career, actually, believe it or not, in the airline industries with British Airways in England. I worked with them for a year and then moved to Switzerland, worked with Fairmont Hotels in Switzerland for 4 years, then moved to Miami South Beach, worked for the Lowe's Hotels for 3 years, then moved to Toronto, Canada, worked with Starwood, IHG, and Hilton, and then moved to the Bay Area, San Francisco in California, where I was for the last 5 years. What I did with Hilton in my last position was I was the area director for learning and talent development. A part of my job was to develop the leadership and the existing talent pipeline within the organization. So we are able to set everybody up for success, and also to do various brand and culture training programs and open all the Conrads and Waldorf Astorias globally around the world. So that is what I did in a nutshell. And I have the privilege and pleasure by joining AKAM in August of 2020 last year.
We're very happy to have you here. And I know our buildings feel fortunate to have your services as well. So tonight we're going to talk about what you bring to the table as far as your staff training and development. And just to give an overview for everyone tonight, we'll be discussing defining leadership. And in this case, we mean in the buildings, coaching versus consulting, which I know, Vishal, is very important to differentiate to you, giving constructive feedback, which I think everyone should learn how to do, including myself, the importance of training, and then we'll do a Q&A. And ordinarily, we do a Q&A at the end, but we do invite you all to, throughout this discussion, please feel free to send any questions that you have as they come to you, because it's just us two mice tonight, so we want to keep it interactive. All right, so Vishal, want to discuss a little bit as far as what is leadership, how do you define that, and how do you elevate property staff management at our buildings? Because that seems like a very daunting task, and it seems almost kind of too good to be true sometimes. It seems a little salesy and not necessarily something that is actually possible. So can you just discuss a little bit about what you do in as far as what you bring to the table when it comes to our buildings?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. You know, a lot of the things growing up and, working with different people, I have learned managing is actually not a science, it's an art. So the first step is, how do people learn at a job? 10% of your learning, believe it or not, happens through reading and taking courses. 20% of your learning happens from learning from others. 70% is job experiential. So a lot of our learning is experiential. And what happens a lot of the time is when we are managing our staff members or team members, we are really not engaging them in learning on in an experiential way. A lot of it is we give them policies, handouts, and books, how to function, or what are the do's and don'ts of working in a building, or what are the do's and don'ts of doing in the responsibilities. All of them is given in a handbook. So when you read, and when you actually read, your retention is only 10%. You don't really retain any knowledge through reading. So all that money that you just spent in colleges went down the drain. I'm sorry. But a lot of the time what happens is we give them policies and handbooks to read on how to be an effective employee. That doesn't work like that. Most of your learning happens through practice by doing and teaching others. So when we talk about managing people in today's day and age, you have to also realize, Elise, this is the first time in the history of the world we have 5 generations working together. It has never happened before. And a lot of our building team members are very tenured staff, and they're in a different generation. And a lot of these problems, or a lot of the challenges stem from generations when one generation tries to manage a different generation in another way. So when we talk about managing people, we don't really manage people today or performance. It's about how do you inspire performance. We need to start by inspiring performance, not managing performance. And when you talk about inspiring performance, it talks about what is your leadership style? What kind of a leader are you? How do you connect with your team members? And when we talk about different leadership styles, there is no one leadership style that's the best leadership style. It's always a mix of different approaches and style. And the best manager in today's day and age is who changes their approach depending on the audience, or depending on the teams they're managing, or depending on the generation they're managing and giving feedback to. When we talk about being leaders, I think what is one of the most important thing as a leader is to recognize. Are we recognizing our team members? Studies have shown by Accenture, 43% of our team members leave and go to another job or are disinterested in the job is because they're not being recognized by their managers. And when I talk about recognition doesn't mean that you tell somebody you're doing a great job. I think it's very important. It's the way you recognize. I think the first step is to identify the right time and the right moment to recognize a team member. Then the second step is to briefly describe the behavior you're recognizing, and then thank the team member and encourage them to continue doing the good work. A lot of the times when you're recognizing a team member, you need to always tell them why, because you want that behavior to be repeated. And that is what's not happening. And with a lot of our managers are not recognizing our team members, and they're not able to create an effective culture. When you talk about culture, it all starts from the top. So the managers of a property are the ones who are starting the culture at a building, and it all starts from the top. It's starting from how are they recognizing, how are they leading a team, and how are they coaching a team to begin with. Studies have shown that if your managers are disengaged, your employees are going to be disengaged. So it's very important. As per Gallup, when a company is engaged, or your productivity goes up by 21%, your customer ratings go up by 10%, your profitability goes up by 22%.
Wow.
Think about it. Employees who actually work for engaged managers are 59% more likely to be engaged.
Wow.
Managers who work for engaged leaders are 39% more likely to be engaged. It all starts from the top.
Got it. So I was just going to clarify, in our case, when you say managers, you're talking about the property managers and the property staff being the people that they are leading.
Absolutely right. Yes.
So how do you, I always say when I'm speaking about what you do for us, it's not a boot camp. It sounds like it might be, just that you're going to go in there with a ruler and say, this is how it's done. And obviously you're saying that's exactly the opposite. You're actually invigorating your staff. But how does that really work? That sounds like, what do? You go in, you teach the manager the art of management, and then they go in and, demonstrate to the staff, or, can you take me through a little bit of how this actually is executed? I think it's amazing.
Absolutely. So we have our managers come through a training program, which is called, specifically designed for our managers. It's called Art of Managing People. The first thing we teach our managers is be a coach and not a consultant. Now, what is a coach? A coach is a person who is your partner, who is your advocate, who is your champion. A consultant is the person who will tell you what to do. So when you're talking about coaching, the main difference is a coach will ask you questions. And we tell the managers, ask your questions to your team members, and let them come up with a solution, because the buy-in is going to be much higher if they come up with a solution than you telling them what to do. So always have a coach mentality. When we talk about coaching, and this is what we believe with AKAM, coaching focuses on developing a person's skill, knowledge, and job performance. It usually will last for a short period of time and should be used, when there's a well-defined goal. The sports coach is a great model to keep in mind when you're coaching team members, because coaching focuses on performance while mentoring focuses on individuals. And a lot of the times people don't realize that they end up mentoring people when It's not it's not the need of the moment. The need of the moment is coaching, and it has great benefits for the organization as a coach, as a coachee, and the organization. You're able to develop different styles. And when you talk about coaching, there are always two different styles of coaching. There's an informal coaching approach, which is immediate on the job, which is a very effective approach. There's the formal coaching opportunities, which is setting aside time for coaching. So we encourage our managers, because they're on a property level, to make sure they're having those informal coaching moments with their team members, casual discussions, conversations about their goals, objectives they have, challenges, and general on-the-job performance, which is integrated into your day-to-day actions in the moment, and it is ideally a part of your culture. That is what we believe when we are developing our team members and we want to extract the best performance. Let's introduce those informal coaching moments. There is formal coaching also, which is basically setting time aside. It is more specific, detailed, established actions, plans, and processes are in place. There's a performance review. And this is where you have correctable problems or issues. And when developing a skill, you're having a conversation with them. And when we talk about coaching, we also tell our managers, please make sure coaching should not be mistaken for a disciplinary issue. Two very, very different things, Also, make sure when you're coaching your team members, make sure they're open to it. Find the right time to do it, and you want to be effective as a coach. You need to make sure, if you're not, and this is this program, the program that we facilitate, Art of Managing People, talks about how do you coach effectively, when not to coach, which is also very, very important. If there's an emergency situation or someone is not open to it, believe it or not, sometimes you're not the best person to coach. And that's when I encourage our managers to learn and do a lot of different role plays and work with other managers and observe them and see how they do it. So you are able to embed that in your leadership style.
And I think that's really valuable. I mean, I think what you touched on, I know a lot of times I hear, a certain property staff member is a disgruntled person, and you're not going to be able to change them. That's what you think. So say that is something when you come into a building and you're told the concierge is just very difficult to work with, and there's going to be just a very, sure, come in, do your thing, but like realistically, what are we going to get from this? Can you kind of walk me through what your approach is to a difficult staff member?
Absolutely. So a lot of the times you have to realize the staff member is really not the difficult. It is a lot of the times it's the circumstances in the environment that what you call extracts a behavior which is not desirable. So my approach is, when you're going to a building, when you have a staff member like that, the first thing is, let's have a conversation with them. Let's listen to what they are saying. A lot of the time, what managers do is they will talk at the staff member, not talk to them. And when you're talking about listening, are we truly listening? Because there are different types of listening. I encourage our managers not to indulge in cosmetic listening. Cosmetic listening is that you're sitting there in front of the team member and you're having an out-of-body experience. You're there physically, mentally, you're in Bora Bora. Then you have a conversational listening. You're engaged in the conversational, you're listening, you're thinking, you're talking, you have active listening. I'm very focused on what you're saying, recording the facts and paying attention. And believe it or not, there's deep listening. I'm more focused on you, and I'm trying to get a sense of who you are. And that is what I encourage when you are having a challenging team member where you see there's an opportunity. And the whole idea is try to get a sense of where they're coming from. And a lot of the times, you will see they're not unreasonable people. If they've had this job for 25 years or 30 years, they have to be doing something right? They have seen a lot of managers come and go. So they've still been there with the building. And, a lot of the time is asking them, what is it I can do to support you and set you up for success? Where do you see me? That's the best approach. When you take up a new building, I encourage the managers, have a meeting with your team members. Ask them, what are we doing well and what can we do differently? What are the opportunities? How can I set you up for success? Like there was another building I visited a few months ago where the team members were not happy, not because of the job or anything. They just needed new uniforms. They weren't happy with the uniforms. And believe it or not, none of the managers did that or got them new uniforms. And it just took one meeting to sit with the team members and ask them, what are your strengths? What are you guys doing well in the building? What are we as a manager doing well? And what can I do differently as a new manager? And the first thing was get us uniforms. And when we got them the new uniforms, guess what? Their morale and their ownership went really, really high, because everybody who works in the building has a sense of pride. They've been there for 25, 30 years. There's a sense of pride. And that is what we want to give them. We want to set them up for success. Little things like that encourage them, and it makes them feel heard.
Yeah.
We are listening to what they're saying. Little feedback like that really encourages performance, because when you feel good about yourself, studies have shown, when you feel good about yourself, your performance is elevated. And the way we dress up is a huge part. So, things like that, when they're asking things like that, those are justified things they're asking for. Of course, there is then you have team members who just do not want to listen. That's when you have a bit of a formal coaching with them. And maybe that's the time you need to tell them, these are what are the expectations of your role. And we are going to evaluate your performance in another 30 days, or we will have a conversation to find out, how are you doing? What have you done well? And I always encourage, when you ever give feedback or whenever you coach, always start with, what has the team member done well? What are your strengths? Never use the word negative. This is wrong. Always say, what are your strengths? And this is what you can do differently. And also remember, I always tell people, never say when you do this. You should always say when this happens. Remember, feedback is about the behavior, not about the person.
Right.
So a lot of the time, it's the approach of the managers. Is this program, Art of Managing People, teaches how do we approach our team members, and to make sure that they are exhibiting the performance that we are looking to achieve by managing the building and creating an experience for the residents.
Great. So we have a question here. We have a few questions, but I'll start with this one. And it kind of touches upon strategy that you were discussing. Do you have any strategies on coaching a staff member where there is a language barrier?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And, we are in New York City, which is the second most diversity in the world. So we have a lot of languages. And sometimes when we have that kind of an issue, we do get an interpreter involved. We make sure that we're very sensitive to different cultures linguistically. So we always make sure, if that is the situation, we will get an interpreter involved to make sure that we are giving the message clearly. But however, when the interpreter is there, we are going to be present over there. The manager has to be present over there to make sure that, we are doing it the right way. We are not looking to intimidate our team members. So we want to make sure communication is flowing effectively, even non-verbally. Because a lot of the times you may not be able to communicate, but believe it or not, Elise, we communicate 55% through our gestures and body language. 37% is a tone of voice, 7% is words. So non-verbal cues are very, very important. As a coach, you always want to have an open body language when you are giving any kind of feedback. And that is what we also make sure the interpreter who is giving feedback is also, believe it or not, following the same non-verbal cues that are expected.
See, this is where we're so lucky to have you. You're a wealth of knowledge. Okay, so here's another question. This person loves the philosophy. They're 100% aligned with this. They're wondering where they struggle as a board member is how to approach building staff, since the way they're currently set up, they work with the manager, who then, turns around communications to the resident manager and the doorman and all that. So what is your stance as far as recommending boards to engage directly with resident managers? Should you let the management team just manage? What's appropriate, as far as staffing when it comes to working with the board members?
That's a very good question. And I've seen in some buildings, the board members have a very, very good and a close relationship with the staff. So they're not shy of giving that kind of a feedback. But however, I would recommend, if you see there's an issue with the staff, let the resident manager and our management team handle it. And however, What the board members should definitely feel free to do is a follow-up. And our managers are also encouraged, once a board member has come and spoken to them about a certain performance, if that has been changed, what have you done? It is absolutely essential. There has to be a follow-up on the part of a manager to give the board member feedback. Thank you for the feedback. This is what was done. And moving forward, this should not be happening. Because what is the job of a manager? A job of a manager is to manage and inspire performance. So a lot of the times they are the ones who are dealing with the staff on a daily basis. So sometimes what also happens is a lot of the times a board member may see a behavior that may not mirror the culture or the environment of the building, which is not right, the behavior. So, but sometimes there's always a backstory. So when you tell somebody you're doing something wrong, it's always important to find out why they are doing wrong. Let's do a little bit of an investigation because, we are all human beings. It's human to make an error. Right. 80% of what we do, Elise, is emotion. 20% is intellect. So a lot of the times when we are dealing with people, remember, human beings are not creatures of logic, but creatures of emotion. Right. And that's the emotional intelligence quotient that comes in, that you want to make sure that people are self-aware. A lot of the peoples are not self-aware, and the greatest fault is to be conscious of none. So it's so important to be aware of your behavior, and that is the manager's job, to make the team member aware of their behavior and make sure that behavior, if it is not the right behavior, it's not being repeated and it doesn't become a part of the culture. Believe it or not, to make a behavior or to break a behavior, it takes 21 times.
Huh, I didn't know that.
Right. So it's very important that we are definitely the board members. And long story short, the board members should definitely rely on the property manager because they are the SMEs, the subject matter experts, when it comes to coaching and giving feedback and evaluating performance.
Great. That's great feedback. So can you give us some examples where, because I know this always seems great, but people are afraid, or at least when I first heard about these types of service, yes, I want to have elevated property staff performance, but I also want to maintain the integrity of my culture that I have here. We have a very tight-knit building community, and I love my doorman. I don't want them to feel discouraged that I, am bringing someone in to bring up staffing levels. Can you kind of break that philosophy down a little bit as far as what that means to a culture that actually is being nurtured, but staff performance can still be evaluated? Because I think when we spoke, it sounds like a lot of buildings, when we take over buildings, they don't necessarily even have manuals for property manager. The property staff don't know what they're supposed to even do. There's no actual, rules or anything for what they're expected to do. So can you kind of walk me through that?
Yes, absolutely. Great question again. A lot of the times when you're going into a building, the first thing is you need to know what is the existing culture of the building, how many staff and team members they have in the building. You need to know, as a property manager, what are the roles and responsibilities of a staff member. Once you have them, the staff member need to have those in their hand also. Even if they've been there for 20 years, it's important we create policies and procedures, or SOPs, standard operating procedures, when we work. Because remember, when you're giving constructive feedback to somebody, or when you're evaluating performance, you have to have some kind of an SOPs or performance guidelines or roles and responsibilities. How are you going to give feedback when the team members are not even aware of what their objectives are or goals are when it comes to performance, or their roles and responsibilities? So it's extremely crucial that each team member has a job description or has something in writing what is expected of them. And this can be easily created by the property manager, because property managers are working with the guidance of the human resources department. Absolutely. The property managers could definitely create these responsibilities and roles based on what is expected from the team members. Because, the whole idea is adults will not do what you expect. Adults will do what you inspect. And you have to be inspecting. As simple as that. But you can only inspect if there are performance guidelines and risk guidelines for the responsibilities and what the job entails.
Mm-hmm.
right?
Do you associate that with tips? I know that this has come up for, a few of our clients where, the tips are commensurate at the end of the year with performance. Is that something you recognize? You discourage?
Tips is a form of recognition. So what is the full form of tips? The full form of tips is to ensure prompt service or to ensure proper service. Now, that is up to a board member. Tip is more like a reward, that if the board member feels the team member exhibited the behaviors and went above and beyond, absolutely. We don't encourage our team members to solicit tips, but yes,
Right.
if a board member feels that, it's not like we're going to a coffee shop and there's a jar next to the counter and there's a dollar sign and a smiley face. We're not encouraging that. A lot of the times, tips are something, it depends on an individual. If they have gone above and beyond, or they've done something that is probably even out of their responsibility or duty, but they've performed it, absolutely. If you feel you should tip them, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, what is a tip? It's a reward, it's a recognition. So now when you tip somebody for exhibiting that behavior, what are the chances that person is going to exhibit that behavior again? High, because he got tipped or she got tipped because of that behavior. So that becomes a part of the culture and value system. And that's how you create a culture in an environment, when you recognize behaviors that you want to be repeated again.
What about bonuses, though? Is there a best way to structure bonuses, as far as years of service versus performance? What are your best recommendations?
It depends on buildings. It depends on what the board feels, where I always say there has to be a bit of a both, but I think bonus should be based on performance, in my opinion, because we have always seen, because what is a bonus? A bonus is your performance. It's what you did. You did well, you did a great job. It should be tied up. It's also tied up about how many safety incidents, or, how many sick days, or how many days were you at the job, all of that, all of those kinds of performance objectives. When you have a bonus structure in place, it always has to tie with what the performance objectives are.
Mm-hmm.
Because a bonus is essentially recognizing a performance.
Right. All right. So here's another question. How do you handle a property manager when they're new to a board? What do you generally do as far as, immerse yourself in that building's culture?
The first thing is the property manager needs to do a needs analysis. What is the needs analysis? They need to find out as to what is the requirement of the board, and what did the previous property manager do well, and what were the expectations of the board? What was the gap, if there was any? Was there a gap between the expectations of the board and what the previous property manager did? And if there was, how do you bridge that gap? A lot of the times it could start with a simple meeting with the board and ask them, I am new. What are your expectations from me? What can I do differently to support you and set you up for success as a board? How can I help you to create culture, or so a lot of the times, Elise, it's not about changing culture. It's all about elevating culture. It's basically building on existing culture. All buildings have great culture. We just need to elevate it or channelize it in the right direction. And that's where the property manager comes in. That's their job. And I always say, first thing is, before you telling people what to do, let's listen to what the board has to say. What is their mindset, and what are their expectations from your role before you start performing even?
That's a good,
once you have that, that's when you start working through and setting up goals and objectives. And all your goals and objectives should be based on the needs and requirements of the board. And even when you're dealing with the team members or you're giving them objectives, it all has to start from there.
Yeah, actually, someone just asked, so speaking of that, what are some measurable objectives for a doorman? And then what are some measurable objectives for a porter?
So when you talk about a doorman, what are the measurable objectives is to make sure to be there on time, to make sure that, you're opening what is a doorman? You're a door person, actually. Let's be politically right, door person. What are you are you there to open the door? Are you there to greet? Are you greeting everybody? Are you opening the door for everybody? Are you helping them with their bags if they need assistance? That is one of an objective. The objectives is you have high resident contact. So are you being able to create an experience? And a lot of the boards also do this. One of the buildings I'm working with have actually created evaluation forms and given to the residents, and if they evaluate their a certain skill sets, like for a door person, did the door person smile? Did the door person open the door? Did the door person offer assistance? If these three objectives were met, that's a great performance. And all these evaluations are done by the residents living in the building. So absolutely, you can do that, and that's how you measure their performance. Same thing with the porter, based on what their roles and responsibilities are. Have they done this? And a lot of the buildings, one of the buildings that I work in, have these evaluations given to all their residents, who give these evaluations every 3 months back to the property manager, who puts it together and is able to measure performance based on their feedback.
Thank you. So what about for you? Now you do the art of managing people, and that is something that you've rolled out to us as a corporate level, to our property managers. What about, obviously some people are very trainable. What about when a managing executive isn't particularly skilled, and they don't do very much more than just doing checklists for the resident managers, and then they write up staff and when they misbehave, and that's really the end of their management style? How do you correct that?
So, the first thing is very important is to set some time aside with your property manager, and let's give them constructive feedback. What is constructive feedback? Constructive feedback is, we want to focus on the performance. It is two-way. We look for solutions. It is future focused, and it is specific. And when you see a challenge like that, what we do is we would put them very closely and have them work with another property manager who is meeting expectations and who is going above and beyond and is meeting all the objectives when it comes to performance. So that is the best way, because you learn a lot from watching others and observing others. So we definitely partner them with property managers who are really doing a great job, to see what they're doing really well and how can they mirror those behaviors and make it their own. Again, I don't recommend anybody to be cookie cutter and scripted. You want to be authentic. So let's celebrate your authenticity. However, let's have you mirror those performance gems that the other person is exhibiting at the job and make them your own. So yes, that's a great way to set them up for success, and it's a tool and a resource that we are partnering them with people so they can see them firsthand. What are they doing well? And what can, even things like going on to the board meetings and observing them. How are these property managers executing, a board meeting, and how are they participating, and how are they handling any complaints or issues?
Right. Yeah, no, it's true. And I think, again, what I think is so important about what you do is you teach people how to succeed, even if this isn't a natural strength. If a managing agent or a managing executive is really excellent and has a lot of maybe construction background, but they're not exactly people, that's where you step in and you set people up to succeed. And I think what's important about what you do is you're not just you come into a building, you write your analysis, you say, here we go, now it's time to move on. You are part of their process, and you seem, you're there and you interact with them. And I know that, as part of your process, you always do an evaluation of yourself at the end, which I think is great. And your feedback is always, and this is anonymous feedback, and it's always very positive. So I think that speaks to the fact of, you're embracing people where they're at, and you're giving them tools to succeed. You're not just mandating, which is exactly what you're saying is not how to manage people. So it's refreshing that you practice what you preach, essentially.
Again, a little thing about what is feedback? When we are giving anybody feedback, Elise, what are we trying to create? When we're giving anybody any kind of feedback, what are we trying to create? That's the first question I ask everybody. When you give feedback, the first thing you're trying to create is trust. trust. What is feedback? It's all about creating trust with whoever you're giving feedback. And when you talk about creating trust, what are some of the tips? The first tip is when you are giving anybody feedback, it's to convey an intent to help the person, not hurt.
Right.
A trust igniter is, be sure your intention is to help the other person to be more successful. And always it's important when you provide feedback, make it timely. The feedback window is 72 hours. You should never cross the 72-hour window when you're giving somebody feedback, when you want to ignite trust. And on the same token, what is a staller? A trust staller will be, you avoid giving any kind of feedback, keep it and quiet and store it for the performance review and do it once in a year. So you have missed all those informal coaching moments where you could have caught the person in the behavior and given them the feedback, but you instead stalled it by waiting for a whole year. And another trust tip I always tell people is when you're giving feedback, describe the behavior and the impact. That ignites. Keep the facts, focus on the behaviors. A staller is when you add your own interpretations or embellish facts. The other trust tip to create trust is always, firstly, is important is to get the other person's point of view. Ask them their views on the behavior and its impact. That's going back to coaching. A staller is when you just turn it into a one-way conversation and you don't even ask questions. It's always important when you're having any kind of feedback or coaching movement, make sure you move the discussion forward. What will we do differently? Let's get a commitment. A staller is when you just finish the conversation dead end with no opportunity to let them respond, and they have no idea what the future looks like. So when the person walks out after that conversation, they'll feel like, I'm not sure what just happened.
Yeah.
It's like, when you give somebody feedback, you should always give it like a statement. Great job, Elise. That's a statement. Elise, you did a great job. Now that's a question. Now think about it. How would you feel when you hear this, Elise? Elise, you did a great job.
Yeah,
that's really a question. Exactly. Elise, you did a great job. That's a statement. So always remember, when you are doing that, you want to make sure you're also using the right language.
That's great. Okay. So speaking of using language, should the manner in which doorman and the concierge staff greet residents and guests be scripted?
I don't.
Hotel days.
I don't believe. Now, hotel days also have changed. So when I was in my last job, I was training for luxury. And what is true luxury service? True luxury service is personalizing service. It is like giving somebody a well-tailored suit. Everybody's size is different, so it has to be hemmed, shaped, and fitted according to the person's size. It's the old philosophy, one shoe does not fit everybody. So same thing, if you have a problem, I have a problem, our resolution will be very different based on what we think is a resolution. So a lot of the times, always personalized service. However, on the same token, you don't want to come across as somebody who is very intrusive. Also, you want to make sure you don't come across somebody who is very casual. It's very fine line. I always tell people, if you know a person, and it's a simple thing. I have a resident who says, I don't like being called by my last name. I'm very specific about it. So I will tell the team members, when you see the resident one-on-one, call them by the first name. But however, if you see the resident and they're surrounded by people you don't know, always address them with their last name. Never address it with their first name, because you want to follow that protocol of formality and be conservative. Always use a conservative approach. But however, on the same token, if they're insistent, use my first name. I do not want to be called with my last name. Do that. Because here what you're doing is you're personalizing service. You're not cookie cutter or scripted. You're not robotic. And that's what service is all about. It's about comfort. The person needs to feel comfortable, because at the end of the day, these are residents, these are homes. So you want to make them feel that welcome home. How was your day? Have a great evening. Have a pleasant evening. Mr. Smith. or John, how was your day? Again, it's a lot of the time, it's your approach. So yes, I'm not a fan of cookie cutter, and luxury service is not cookie cutter or scripted.
So
We
do you,
have,
yeah, I was going to ask, do you help, say that's not a natural, you walk a building, for example, and you're noticing that when you walk in the door, no one stands up, they don't greet you. How do you correct that behavior in that case? So you don't give a script, but do you tell them, the staff members, do you say to staff members, this is how we would prepare, prefer you do this, or what do you do in that case?
if that is happening, the first thing is, what is the standard operating procedure, or what are we looking to achieve here? The first thing is, it's the deportment, it's the demeanor. So when you have the standard, what is the standard? The standard is that you are standing straight, your deportment is right, your shoulders are on the side, and you are saying good morning, open body language, you're saying good morning, good evening. If they are not practicing that, that's when the property manager needs to talk to them and coach them and ask them questions. Why would they be sitting, or is that a standard? What is the standard? Let's begin with, what is the standard? What is the rule of engagement here? And once you have that, it's easier to have that talk with the manager. This is not acceptable. What is acceptable is everybody standing up, having the right deportment, hands on the side. When somebody walks in, good morning, good evening. Let's move forward with this. And do I have your commitment moving forward that you will be engaging with the residents in this way?
So that is a corrective pattern. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I always say, when you see a behavior, 72 hours. And always a great rule is, a great tip to correct a behavior or give somebody feedback is, when you give somebody positive feedback, recognition, do it in the beginning of the shift, because it's going to lighten up and make them even perform better throughout the day. If you have to give somebody constructive feedback, give it towards the end of the shift or end of the day, so they have time to process and think about it.
Okay, I think that's a good tip for life, management or not. Okay, so this person is a board member, and they've observed that their managing agent and fellow board members do encourage the resident manager, in this case it's a super, to write staff up rather than coach them. So how do you work around a flawed chain of command?
And that's where our property managers come in, who have gone through the program, and we always tell them, the first thing is a conversation, because you have to remember, what would you rather use, sugar or vinegar? If you want to change your behavior, you want to get the buy-in, you want to make sure, you want to coach, because when you're coaching somebody, it shows that you really care about them. You want to set them up for success. If you're writing somebody up, it shows that, well, do I really trust you? Are you igniting trust? My first thing is, whenever you're writing up somebody or you're going to coach somebody, first thing you should think is, what am I doing? Am I going to ignite trust or stall trust? Because if you're going to stall trust, what are the chances that performance is going to change? Not really. If it does, it will only change for a certain period of time. But if you ignite trust, the chances are for a much, much longer time.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think it is hard to gain trust if your first directive would be to write someone up, because then you've immediately broken that trust tree. I think your approach makes sense. You have the conversation and you try to get the comfort level to the place where they're performing, so you don't have to write them up. If you have to.
Right. And it's a very traditionalist approach, it's called management by fear. Doesn't happen anymore.
No.
Nobody, people will not react to it in a positive manner. It's really not going to change culture. And a lot of the times when I have working with different people, I always tell them, when you're writing an email or even approaching somebody, read the email loud. Does it come across rude? Does it come across discourteous? If it does, change your approach.
Do you use caps? Did you use all caps?
I know a lot of the time people love writing emails, and I had this very interesting email a few days ago when somebody said thank you to me, but that thank you was said in it's like that person was obligated to say thank you. It wasn't heartfelt. I can read it in the email. Why? So, my thing is, if you're a manager, I just wonder, how are you managing your team members when you're writing an email like this to a colleague? Simple.
Well, my
How are you?
email is the all caps. Please don't write to me ever in all caps. You're yelling at me and I know it.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Okay, are there challenges? This is actually, I think, you touched upon this in the very beginning, and I think it's very pertinent to most buildings that have extensive staff. Are there challenges with working with multiple generations that you find? And then how do you define the leadership within that? Because someone might be older, but they're being, they're reporting to someone younger. And if you're thinking about that generation, it might not be, we hear that a lot actually when we're proposing managers, this is not going to work with our resident manager because, they're significantly younger. So how do you coach people through those generational gaps?
That's a program, that's a whole part of art of managing people, where I give them when I talk to managers about different generations in the workplace, like, this is the first time, like I said, in the history of the world, we have 5 generations working together. And when we talk about generations, the 5 generations that we have in the workplace are the traditionalists, but they're far and few because they were born prior to 1946. We have the baby boomers who were born in 1946 to 64. We have Gen X's who were born from 1965 to 1982. We have the millennials born after 1983. By 2025, 75% of our workforce is going to be millennials. Then we have Generation Z, which was born after 95, who went into the workforce in 2017. So a lot of the times when we are working with a multi-generational workforce, we always tell them, if you have a team member, for example, who is managing a person who falls in the baby boomer generation, remember, you want to be more conservative with your approach. You need to address them like Mr. or Miss. You want to make sure you're not texting. You're having a conversation. Because this is a generation that grew up without the phone and grew up without computers. They are great communicators. They make great coaches because they know how to navigate through the political waters of a work climate. So when you're talking with somebody like that, have that communication. When you're talking with the Gen Z, yes, absolutely use texting. Text their schedule, they will love it. So a lot of the times, it's how are you giving them feedback? How are you what approach do you use? When we talk about, see, again, if it's a concern, Elise. No matter what generation, you have to address it. But having little knowledge about them, those little gems of things, you can probably, use in your coaching style, always elevates the whole coaching style for the coach and the coachee. So, in this program, we go through the different generations, their learning motivations, their values, their delivery method, like, for example, traditionalists. Anybody born prior to 1946, what is the feedback? Feedback is they assume that they meet objectives unless they receive contrary feedback. That was their approach. Baby boomers prefer well-documented feedback all at once.
This is so interesting. Wow.
Right. Gen X's prefer regular feedback. Millennials prefer frequent on-demand feedback. Gen Z prefer feedback in real time.
And if you're me, you prefer no feedback because you're perfect, right? I'm kidding.
So a lot of the time, but you have to also realize, now a lot of the people will be like, yeah, but you're putting us you're being cookie cutter and scripted, or you're putting us in a boxing us. This is a study that is out there, and it is something that I don't believe that we have to follow it, because a lot of the times you have to remember, if you were a millennial, but you were raised by a baby boomer, so you may have a lot of those values also. You may not be totally a lot of the time, we are all a product of our environment, I believe in. So again, it's based on the environment we grew up in, or the way we were raised a lot of the times. Also as a big
on a good point. Sorry to interrupt. You touched on the fact, so we discussed the generation gaps, but what about gender gaps that are specific to culture? So if someone in a staff grew up in a different country where a female's role might have culturally been different than what's more common here, how do you bridge that gap with the staff and understanding, equality in roles?
I think the most important is diversity and inclusion training. I mean, that is a big conversation nowadays. Everybody should go through diversity and inclusion training. If that is where the issues are stemming from, a diversity and inclusion training is the best way to go through it. So you're giving people the knowledge as to remember what is expected from you when it comes to being diverse and inclusive.
So it's a matter
important.
of teaching the staff members, diversity inclusion training.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
if this is going on in a building and you hear there's some issues, in this way, your approach would be that you would recommend this type of training.
Absolutely, a diversity and inclusion training, and they both go hand in hand. It's like diversity was throwing a party and inclusive was asked for a dance. Inclusion was asked for a dance. It's as simple as that. It's so important they go hand in hand. We have to do, that is a very, very important, that which should not be ignored. If that is a challenge, we definitely need to have them trained, because a lot of the times you have to realize if people are coming to certain places, they have a very different mindset. So we want to make sure that we are using these principles and the standards of the country we are living in and working in.
So you're speaking about that, and now here's another question kind of going off that. How can property managers coach their staff in a way that prevents them from forming cliques based on shared nationalities, and how do you create a bond within the staff and try not to create that clique environment?
I think the most important thing to do, create a bond amongst your staff members, is have some kind of a quarterly activity with your team members all together where you're recognizing and celebrating the good work they're doing. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be something very expensive. Recognition does not have to be expensive. Recognition can be as simple as having a pizza party. So the other day I went to a building, and one of our property managers, Leah, who was great, we did a training, and Leah had a pizza party for the team members after a training. That was such a great way to recognize and learn. So it was basically it was like a lunch and learn, and everybody enjoyed it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a matter of taking the work element out of the workplace to let people be people, and get to know each other in a different way than they might ordinarily. I think that's very helpful in a work environment.
Yes.
So speaking of, now we're talking about informality in culture, they've noticed an increased level of familiarity between staff and residents, and they feel, they discuss personal issues, they get involved in each other's lives, and they've seen staff hug and kiss adults, even children, and this person isn't really on board with that. How do you approach that level of service and separation? I know this is particular probably to certain boards, because then there's other, staff that they probably welcome a more familial environment. So what do you recommend?
No, again, this goes back to the same question. It's being, you have to personalize service. Now, again, we cannot have then it would be cookie cutter and scripted. A lot of the times, how do you tell a resident? I don't know. If a resident says to you, I do not want to be called with my last name, I am so specific about it. How do you tell a resident, no, we are going to call you by your last name because that is what is expected?
Right.
I always say, again, it's about service and informality. Absolutely, we train our team members to be more formal. But you have to also remember, Elise, human beings are creatures of emotion. Now, if they've seen somebody grown right in front of them, and that is a question I'm asked all the time, but this person grew up in front of me. He was a baby when they came into the building. And now he's an adult. So how do I change that behavior? And I always tell them, don't change a behavior if that is okay with that person. If it's not, then you might want to change the behavior. But yes, there are certain standards. Like I said, again, a little thing could be when you see that person surrounded by different people, then don't approach them casually.
Mhm,
That's the
mhm.
best way. If you are one-on-one, absolutely. But if there's like just your question, somebody saw them doing that. So clearly
Right,
there were other people when you did that. So I
right.
always tell people, if that is happening, that's the best thing is to be more formal when you have other residents around or visitors or guests, be formal. But
Mhm,
if you're one-on-one,
mhm,
absolutely tailor the service experience.
mhm. And that is what makes it luxury, as you said. That's what
Absolutely. Yeah.
makes it a luxury experience because it's a curated experience. It's not,
Right.
and I always say that too. ACAM, we don't just, it's just not like a one and done deal. We try to really curate what we give to buildings based on the community that they have. And if it's working, great. If you need improvements, we're happy to help. But we're not here to say this is the way, you
Yeah,
know?
and and it's so interesting, Elise. When you and I've had the privilege and pleasure of accompanying you on a lot of business pitches, and a lot of the times our boards will tell us, yes, we are in a very upscale neighborhood, but we do not want that stuffy service.
Right,
It's
right.
happened so many times, and that's when I tell them we are not asking, we are not going to be cookie cutter and scripted. We are not going to change culture. We are just going to build on the existing culture. We are
Mhm,
going to elevate the existing culture through the performance of your team members.
mhm. Right. And I think that is the key difference. I think that takes at least the fear out of it for me, if I were to hear that. And I think it's
Wow.
true. I mean, anyone who knows you would know that that's, you know, I don't know how to, I said you reminded me of the genie from Aladdin, just when you come your magic, but I mean, there's a lot of other words we can use for you. But I think what you infuse in buildings is a lot of positivity. And I think people do need to feel positivity in their environments to perform. And I think the antiquated way of management is the exact opposite. It's exactly what you're saying. It's reinforcing behavior because it's coming from a negative place. If you don't do this, you get a slap on the wrist. Your approach is a completely different discipline, which is encouragement. And I know, even working with you, I feel more encouraged because you're the person that would say, this might not be you, that you correct you
The
do
behavior.
change the behavior, thank you, in a positive way. And that allows me to hear it. If you approach me and I know I could be a certain way, even though I'm quite lovely, if you approach me in a certain way, I just might not listen to you because I don't want to hear that type of feedback. So I would shut it down. And I think what you do is really encouraging. And I think we're, finishing up this evening, which I can talk with you forever because I find you to be fascinating and full of a lot of good tidbits, and I can keep you on recorder. But
Thank
we'll
you.
follow up with a few last questions. So in this case, they've had board members approached by staff, which is porters or door people in person, to complain about the resident manager. How should a board member respond so that the staff still feels heard, but also encourage direct conversations to avoid their place in this, triangle?
And I think that's a great question. If the staff comes and speaks about the resident manager, absolutely take that feedback. But the great way of taking that feedback is share it first with the property manager and see what the property manager says. You really don't want to go back to the resident manager and say, this staff member said this about you, because then you know what? You are completely stalling trust, and it goes against the very grain of feedback, and it shows that the emotional intelligence is not there. So it's
Mhm,
very important when you want to create that change,
mhm,
you have to give feedback. You have to be specific, direct, but you don't want to make it sure it should be like you're accusing somebody or blaming somebody. So a lot of the times I always encourage the board members to work with our property managers, because our property managers are trained to handle such situations. That's why we are investing in them and setting them up for success by developing our talent, by
mhm,
making them go through programs like Art of Managing People.
mhm,
So we really want to make sure that it goes back to this philosophy. When you're talking to the resident manager, you don't want to say, when you do this, when this happens,
mhm, mhm,
is the philosophy that you should be using when you're giving. So that's what I always tell the board: work with the property manager. The
mhm,
property manager is your liaison. They are there to set the resident managers and the team members up for success, to
mhm,
create an experience for the board and the residents living in the building. And your property managers are the subject SMEs, or the subject matter experts, when
mhm.
it comes to managing team members or giving constructive feedback to the resident manager.
So now what happens though if the staff is complaining at the moment to you, the board member? What do you do?
If the staff is complaining to the board member, take their feedback and relay it to the property manager and tell the property manager, what do you think we should do? Ask the property manager. And when the property manager recommends that, what's the action they should take? Have them do the action, and then should be a follow-up with the board member. The property manager should definitely update the board member that this was taken care of.
So you would just say to the person who's complaining, thank you for this information. I appreciate it. And we're gonna resolve this, and then you speak to the property manager and let them handle it. You don't yourself involve yourself.
No, because there's an investigation. You cannot take every complaint at face value.
That's true.
There's going to be a lot of reactions. Then you're going to just work in a very reactive environment. Then your solutions are just going to be knee-jerk reaction solution, which goes against the very grain. So let the property manager, because you have to remember, there are two sides of a story.
Yes, I love that you say this. And you said this to me before when it comes to negative feedback. Because two things that people do, they get very, if you give me negative feedback in the moment, I fire right back at you, which you help untrain here at AKAM. You teach property managers to, I don't want to steal your thunder, but to separate themselves from the complaint, which I think is extremely valuable in life.
Yeah, I have learned one thing. Yeah, Elise, that is so great. Yeah. And I've learned one thing, Elise, feedback is a gift. As simple as that. And, always you can learn something from him. And, going back to your question, let's find out what exactly happened. Let's see the perspective of the team member who came and complained. Let's see the perspective of the resident manager. Somewhere in between, there is a different story a lot of times.
Yes.
Let's discover that before we become reactive and go and speak. Now, what you're doing is when you're reacting to a complaint and without a proper investigation or finding out, you're basically stalling trust and you're creating a culture of disengagement. Why? Because where does culture start from? The top. And if the resident manager who is managing the team members is not going to be engaged because he or she is going to feel that they're not trusted, what's going to happen to the culture of that building? What's going to happen to the engagement level of the staff?
Right, exactly. So someone thinks it sounds like you're not encouraging staff to raise their complaints directly to the resident manager. You're telling the staff to raise their complaints to the property manager?
Yes, I know. So I'm trying to say, if you're not happy with the resident manager, the staff member goes to the board, let the property manager have a conversation. Right. I mean, let the property manager have a conversation with the resident. The board tells the property manager.
Right. Now, what if the staff isn't happy with something else and they go to the resident manager? That's okay too.
Absolutely. If the staff is not happy with something with the work, absolutely, they should go to their resident manager because they all report to the resident manager, right? And the resident manager is the one who is reporting to the property manager or working with the property manager. So absolutely, and the resident manager is there every day. So absolutely, the staff should feel comfortable and should trust if there's a concern or issue to bring it to the resident manager. We have also opened art of managing people for the resident managers and the superintendents. In a few of the workshops, some of the board members have been very, very gracious enough to see the value of this program and send the superintendents and the resident managers to attend it.
Which I think is great because it helps. It just really helps reinforce positive management, which at the end of the day gives positive results.
And the good thing is, Elise, everybody's on the same page.
Right.
Everybody's learning the same thing.
Exactly. So it's not like a secret that's only given to the property manager. It's now passed along to the person who's actually there, the boots on the ground every single day. So, okay. And we have so many just because you have such great information. So we have a few more, and then I would definitely encourage any questions at the end. Please feel free to email myself or Vishal, and we would be happy to discuss with you individually because I know Vishal is a master of this area. So I think we should do another one of these. But so what if the property manager is not open to the perspective of the staff member and always sides with the resident manager no matter what? What do you do there?
And that's okay. And that's a great question. And again, you don't want to let that happen because that's going to create another dysfunction. So that's when you involve probably the management executive who the property manager reports to. And it's okay to do that.
Okay.
A lot of the times, yeah, because not doing something about it will also create a dysfunction, and you don't want to create that.
No, you certainly don't.
Yeah, so you want to make sure then you go, whoever the property manager reports to, have a conversation with them. And with AKAM, the best thing about the company is that it's an truly open door policy. You can have a conversation, and all our management executives are easily available, or our regional managers are there to support you and set you up for success.
Yeah.
We totally believe the resident is not an interruption to our work. The resident is our work.
Here you go.
That's why we are there. We are there to take care of them and support them and set them up for success.
That's right. Okay. So this building has board members that don't feel it's appropriate for the staff to go around the resident manager's back to complain about their boss. So the board members feel that if the staff has a complaint, the staff should go directly to their resident manager or go to a property management company, which in this case would generally be AKAM. It sounds like accept the feedback, listen, and pass it along.
Absolutely. I think it's very important that we have a protocol established. I don't like the command. I don't like the word command. So I always say a chain of protocol, a channel established. So, if you have any kind of concerns about your work, about your roles and responsibilities, or you're having an issue with a resident or any other concerns, go to your resident manager. That's the proper channel. And then it is upon the resident manager to do something about it. And if you're still not happy with the situation, then you need to probably go to the property manager, who the resident manager reports to.
There you go. And I think even when I didn't work at AKAM and I didn't really understand the chain of command, even though we don't like that word, I didn't understand. I kind of thought they were one and the same. I thought a resident manager was a property manager, and they're not. So that, I guess, is a lesson to me when I didn't know, but I think it's very helpful to have clear lines so that way people know who they're reporting to, and they also know who to relay complaints to or get feedback from, what have you. All right. And we're going to finish up with this evening, which is a compliment. So someone says your approach to coaching is very positive in nature, which I 100% agree.
Thank you.
You have ongoing training and regular training programs with our AKAM managers, so they're on board with your coaching style, which I know the answer is yes. That's the whole point, is we do the art of managing people, which is fabulous.
Yeah, and the great part is it has received such wonderful feedback. And I've shared the feedback with you, Elise, already. The program has received such wonderful feedback. It's become such a success that we have all our managers, our senior leadership, one of our senior leaders have gone through it, and they have been raving about the program, that how helpful it is. And it's not that they don't know the information, but it's like presented in such a different and a fresh way, and in such a interactive way. They're like, what, we learned something today. And I always believe in one thing: knowledge is strength. The more you share it, the stronger you are.
Well, I think that you're phenomenal. I know that we are very lucky to have you here at AKAM. You do, our Monday calls, and you invigorate us here. So we're very thankful to have you. I'm very thankful for your time. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. This was a great conversation. I hope it reinvigorates your staff. And we definitely love to help out in any way we can to improve your building's culture. So anyway, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vishal. And we hope to see you soon. Have a great night. Good night.
Have a pleasant evening, everybody.
Bye.